Why are you locked in the bathroom? You talking to me? Maybe you should try getting a job.
So once upon a time, there was a company called Ion Storm that liked the future and iconically bad voice acting. So they made a game based in the distant/near future called Deus Ex. Deus Ex received critical acclaim after release and pretty much set the gold standard for cyberpunk and immersive sim video games. Everyone loved it so much that they made a sequel, absolutely majestic prequel, and spin-off, mobile game, and a sequel to the prequel. Okay, wow, more misses than hits. How is the series? It's a gorgeous universe full of intrigue, political commentary, and stellar visuals, with a story that's as engrossing and gripping as it is well written. But what happens between the games?
Behold, a book.
Deus Ex Blacklight was published by Titan Books and written by James Swallow, who penned a bunch of other Deus Ex books as well as the esteemed Human Revolution itself. Yeah! James Swallow has been nominated for a BAFTA and is a New York Times best-selling author. He also wrote the very game this book succeeds, so, I mean, it pretty much seems like he'd know what he's doing. He's been responsible for a long laundry list of well-received pop culture scripts, books, and other media. But does his long experience hold up and deliver a fresh insight into Deus Ex? Do the good writing elements from the game reflect in the novel he writes? How plausible and reasonable are the events in the book to bridge the two games? Is it even good?
Those are my pizzas. That was my lunch.
Deus Ex Blacklight comes in at 324 pages, mass market paperback, and released on August 23rd, 2016. The same exact date of release for Mankind Divided as well. The book actually takes place between Human Revolution and Mankind Divided, and was advertised as the bridge to gap the two games. It does that really well. Like, really well. So far, it's been my favorite book to read. And maybe that's my personal bias for Deus Ex and other dystopian cyberpunk settings, but either way, the quality of writing in this book is top shelf. So what is Deus Ex? The Deus Ex series begins with the game, Deus Ex, released in the year 2000, following a story set in 2052. However, Human Revolution, Blacklight, and Mankind Divided are all set beforehand, ranging from 2027 to 2029, and that's where our focus is. Human augmentation is in full effect, where prosthetic limbs are now one-to-one, as well as crazy fancy things like biometers built in, enhanced lungs, or that. The playable protagonist of these stories is Adam Jensen, SWAT officer turned security chief turned somewhat private eye, and forcibly augmented individual. He's led on an escapade trying to simultaneously A, uncover the real reason behind the attack on his company that got his love interest killed, and 2, saving the world from a dangerous conspiracy involving controlling augmented individuals. The game ends where our book begins, kinda, almost? Turns out all 12 endings of Human Revolution were canon, so at the end of the game, when a big tower that Jensen is in collapses, he does a big old sleepy sleep into a coma and wakes up in Alaska, Facility 451. I see what you did there. The book follows Jensen as he gets his bearings back and uncovers just how and why he was recovered, and explores how the world has been affected since its actions at Panchaea, and who this mysterious organization is that has the attention of an Interpol task force. This mysterious organization is one of the many fronts for none other than the Illuminati. Yes, the people who many think are sentient lizards that actually run all the governments while masquerading as humans. Not here, though. They're just a bunch of augmented suits who secretly rule the world via cloak and dagger and other espionage nonsense. Anyway, let's talk about 4 of the main players here.
Ed, man, Jen's man.
Our protagonist. He's a loner, but also a fighter until the bitter end and never really gives up on anything. He's amazingly resourceful despite his hardships and can make do with or without his augments. Jensen, being augmented, is a troubled ex-cop who found himself caught up in an augment-centered conspiracy. He never asked for... No, I promised myself I wouldn't say it, please. He was augmented against his will in order to save his life, which leads to a drastic emotional trial for him. While in the games, you can guide Jensen's dialogue at times to fill in for how you think he feels, there's clues here and there that hint that he's never truly been happy with the decision and that it's affected him negatively. In the book, he's introduced with a very temporary memory loss because of the end of Human Revolution, but very shortly over time will get it back and bounces back to normal. At the start, Jensen's situational awareness is described very aptly, showcasing his prowess with combat. Jensen saw the distinctive rough skin on his bare chest that indicated dermal armor implants beneath the flesh. The first attack would have come from him. It couldn't have been more telegraphed if he had been wearing a neon sign over his head. He's sharp, and when he does fight, he's very exceptionally well off. He's effectively succeeded J.C. Denton as the new poster child for the series, which, oh god, please Square Enix, please bring it back. We need it now, we need it bad, we need it now! Denton doesn't entirely work alone, however. In the field, sure, for the most part, but his escapades wouldn't be complete without the aid of...
France is pretty Orchard.
Oh my god, that's a stretch. If I had to describe Francis Pritchard, it would be that he's like that friend of yours who prides himself on being smarmy and cynically witty, and he cracks jokes at your expense, except he has the smarts to back his attitude up, and at the end of the day will still help out for the greater good and is decently reliable as a person. Pritchard started out in the series as this fulsome type of jerk, but eventually shifted to being a more cooperative and helping friend towards Adam. Maybe not friend, but at least very strong acquaintance. He's a cybersecurity specialist, a gray hat, leaning somewhat to white hat, and Jensen's closest ally. And if you look on Tumblr, he's gay lovers with Adam. Upon Jensen escaping the facility and heading back to Detroit for the first time in ages, he meets with Pritchard, and you see just how careful, or perhaps partially paranoid, he gets. The hacker looked drawn and weary, his tapered features appearing gaunt and hollow in the waxy half-light. He cocked his head, studying Jensen carefully, one hand firmly held inside a jacket pocket. Jensen eyed the bulge in his coat. "You gonna shoot me, Pritchard? I know we've never exactly been best buds, but I thought we'd parted on better terms than that." It lines up with his personality in the games, and he's got that smarmy charm that fans of the game know and love so much. And now we have
Jen, Forney.
one of the primary antagonists and a methodical evil woman. She rivals Jensen for the most part of the book and is cunning, sly, and very focused on her work. She's an agent for the Illuminati and is tasked with doing stuff in Detroit. Poor thing. She's ruthless and very cold, especially when she first interrogates Jensen at the start of the novel. She's very blunt and forthright with how she speaks. "You name a thing and you rob it of its power, Mr. Jensen," offered Thorne. 9/11, the Valama Superquick, the Cat 5s, the Incident. Give it a name and you can put it in a box, contain it. It's an important coping mechanism. It helps people to rebuild. Wow, okay, go off. And lastly, instead of one character, I need to discuss a group. So let's meet
Tisk first. 9.
The group as a whole is more integral than one main focal character, so it's hard to pinpoint just 4 alone, but if I did more than that, we'd stuck here for whatever, I'm rambling. Anyway, Task Force 29 is Interpol's on-the-ground attack dogs who go in and do the big investigate and shoot-a-gate. They're extremely efficient at what they do, even in the face of adversity, but what's great is that each member has their own unique personality that really adds to different scenes. Like when one of them is describing Jensen and just decides to use Journey lyrics. "A whole lot of goodies," said Chen, his head bobbing as he spoke. Turns out that Mr. Jensen is a local. Just a city boy, born and raised in South Detroit. And get this, he was a cop. That's where he sourced most of this data. It's sitting there in a secure file in the DPD's personal database. Honestly, God, I've heard this song too much. I can't read it without doing the rhythm. I hate this song. Get out of my head! Seeing as one of Mankind Divided's selling points was that Jensen joins up with Interpol, it's not a stretch nor a spoiler to infer that Task Force 29 is Jensen's foot in the door for getting into Interpol. The fun is in the details, and boy howdy does this book have a lot of fun and a lot of details. As I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of integral characters to the plot. There's the A plot following Jensen and company, the B plot following Interpol, the C plot following 2 members of the Illuminati, and a D plot involving meetings between the Juggernaut Collective, or the group trying to defeat the Illuminati. This book packs so much story into it that, with how everything plays out, it's honestly a really great supplemental read to Deus Ex as a whole. James Swallow was able to create something absolutely faithful and beautiful revolving around such a complex and fascinating world like Deus Ex. I personally would argue that this novel is almost necessary for Deus Ex fans. Reading it would certainly give a lot more context to what happens at the start of Mankind Divided, so in that event, I would urge you to pick it up if you're interested in the story and bridging the gap between the two games. Not only is the action just absolutely stellarly written, but the way that everything is described, from the environment to how things play out, it just feels good and is gorgeously descriptive that leaves you wondering what's next. For example, when Adam is recalling the events of the end of human revolution, the shrieking of tortured metal under the impact of a colossal volume of polar ocean, the wild screams of the mad and the dying, the thunder of his fading heartbeat, lances of light through glassy, shifting waters, and a terrible knowing, a certainty that he would die out there, and nothing would stop that from happening. These kinds of descriptors are all over the book and just so super nice, just mwah! Start to finish, everything just feels so well done and amazingly thought out. Everything feels like a Deus Ex story, despite what few problems it does have. Granted, every book has its problems. For example, it can get overwhelming with everything all at once happening. Things will start to move a bit quickly, and then the pacing is broken up suddenly with a shift to a different perspective or a different plot. Admittedly, it took me a while to really get my focus into the book. For example, the first half of Chapter 2 is just the most slow perspective shift to Plot C, where two people just kind of info dump and intrigue, lure you, and it's just kind of like... I felt like if you moved a bit more action along with the A-plot first before switching, it would have probably played out a bit better. But at the end of the day, it's not really too big of a deal. One other problem I have is actually a bit of a spoiler, so in that way, let's kick our way into the spoiler. Soon may the spoilers come to bring us tidbits and lore, and this is dumb. So the book begins in Alaska, where I was born, yay! And Jensen wakes up out of his little coma nap. How much do you remember? It was a woman's voice, careful and steady, metered with just the right balance of maternal concern and authoritative firmness. It's a cool hook that already gets me invested. The intrigue of the scattered and disoriented questioning of Adam is a very nice way to ease us into the book and start the audience asking all the right questions by asking Adam these questions. He gets interrogated a bit, but also meets another integral character that I haven't introduced yet.
Harrison lays stacks.
Harrison Stacks Stacker is a former steeplejack with big augmented arms for hauling stuff. Like, big arms. Imagine if someone took two excavators and fitted them to the arms. Jensen's even like, oh god, he could rip my arms off, please, God help me. His design is cool from description, but there's no official art of him, so all we have is fan art to go off of. As well as that, he's this kinda meager, haunted individual who just wants to do good and feel good. But he has like AUG PTSD, so he's a little reserved because he doesn't want to hurt people like he has before. We'll see how this comes into play a bit later, but for now, Jensen gets interrogated by Thorn. She asks him about what happened at Panacea. Is it Panchea? Panchea? I don't know how to pronounce it. I'm not going to Google it. Just do it yourself. He can't remember exactly all the details at first. Eventually he does, but he chooses to put Thorn on a bit of an information diet. She's dangerous, and he can tell. Eventually, he gets bullied on the playground, and we see Jensen spring into action for the first time. The knives fell toward the exposed flesh of Jensen's throat, but his attacker was inexpert with them and held the makeshift weapons too close together. Jensen's free hand snapped up and grabbed the closest blade, hearing the metal crunch against the surface of his cyberarm's synthetic palm. He pulled the tattooed man toward him, forcing him to overbalance. Then, as he fell, Jensen struck with his other arm and caught the man hard across the face. His assailant's nose broke with an ugly cracking sound and blood jetted. He kicks him to the curb and then he moves on. Adam escapes with Stacks because he's cool and he's able to regain control of his augments and such, so he's useful and has him tag along. He contacts Pritchard, who's like, Jensen, didn't you die? And Jensen's like, no, lol. And Pritchard's like, okay, yeah, come to Detroit. And he does. Once in Detroit, they see just how bad of a slum town it is. Oh, and it also somehow got worse since the AUG incident. Jensen figures out that the AUGs got the short end of the stick after the incident, and are now homeless and oppressed and... oh boy, I'm gonna touch on this a little bit later. Anywho, what happened in the last year since Jensen took a big sleepy sleep? Well, why don't we go to Seraph's tower to figure it out? So they go, and of course there's resistance because another company bought it out. Jensen goes in and fights this weird box robot that's guarding it. It's a pretty fun scene with some nicely written combat. He fired, unloading every bullet remaining in the CA-4's magazine, marching each flashing hit toward a gap in the plating beneath the box guard's head, where its flexible neck connected. Jolts of sparks vomited out from behind its single-eye lens, and the leg descended with a juddering clank, stopping just short of grinding Jensen into the dust. They go in, they find some homeless AUGs and inspire them to be better. They need a drug called neuropazine, which essentially allows the body to tolerate these augmentations. Otherwise, the body would reject them and cause a whole heap of problems. You know, like dying. One of the secondary reasons they went to Seraph Towers was also to get some neuropazine for Stacks because he began showing some signs of deficiency. Jensen's special though because he has something called protagonist syndrome. I mean, his body weirdly is able to accept and integrate the augmentations totally because of convoluted plot. Anyway, off they go and discover that a local gang, the Motor City Bangers, are doing heinous activities at Milwaukee Junction, a manufacturing plant for Seraph Industries. Naturally, Jensen plans to blow it up. They go, and they do, and one of the biggest offenses of this book that it has to offer happens here. I'm killed. He forced out the words with a low gurgle of blood. His eyes found Jensen, tried to focus. How did this happen to us, brother? He shook, racked with agonized sobs. Look what they did. He didn't see if Stacks triggered the detonator deliberately, or if it was some random nerve impulse that contracted his mechanical hand, but there was a sudden hammer of noise and fire at his back that pushed him up and off his feet, straight into the other doors at the far end of the recycling bay. My main man Stacks, who has had a decent but not fruitful enough amount of character development and intrigue, sacrifices himself to help Jensen blow up the plant. He had like one PTSD freakout because of this incident, went ham, and then died for Jensen's cause, and he was cool. He was interesting, but he was squandered, and I would have absolutely loved to seen him in Mankind Divided. But no, he just helps move the plot along by being a sacrificial pawn for everything. This is homophobic. Anyway, the rest of the book just becomes the adventures of the dynamic himbo duo of Jensen and Pritchard. Later on, Adam runs into Task Force 29 for the first time. He escapes because they think he's involved. Adam goes off, there's B, C, and D plot progression. B plot meets Jensen, wants him to join Juggernaut, but he's like, nah, I'm Gucci. Jensen does some detective work pertaining as to how the MCBs got into the Seraph facility so easily. After confronting the one guy responsible, he eventually does get captured by Task Force 29. They interrogate him a bit, and they think that he's a part of the Bangers, or of the overall group controlling them. And they take him to an airport where the Motor City Bangers are because Adam knows the faces of those involved. So they cuff him and nerf his AUGs and tell him, okay, you're gonna identify him for us. So off they go. Everything goes bad, and Adam pulls a last action hero at the airport, and it's really dumb and cool in a lot of good ways. He jumps onto the plane as it's taking off because time is of the essence, and he's gotta act quick, and it's cool, and... Pushing the Jeep as fast as it could go, he yanked the steering wheel to the right and cut under the cargo jet's trail as the aircraft began to pull away. With all the force he could muster, Jensen punched the emergency release panel, ripping right through the mechanism. He tore out whatever circuitry he found inside, hoping that it would be enough. There was a blur of gold fire, a numbing series of painful shocks as he hit and caught air again, before, mercifully, everything went dark. Aw, hell yeah! So after the airport incident, Task Force 29 is like, I like your cut, G, to Adam, enough that they interrogate him a bit, and they're like, hey, you're cool, you wanna help work for Interpol? And Adam's like, eat dirt, pig. For now. Adam gets out of there, and Pritchard comes back in like, hey, you can hack the corpse of this one guy and get more info on who's responsible. Oh yeah? How? Well, you gotta hack his augmented eyeball in his corpse, my man. Radical. Let's do it. Jensen learns that Thorn is involved because he straight up puts the corpse eyeball into his own because it's augmented. It's a little visceral, not gonna lie, but it's also just kind of like, wow, that's... Ooh, I like that. Anyway, Task Force 29 is en route to deliver the weapons that the MCB stole on a train, but they're about to get assaulted. Then Adam gets on the train to help save Task Force 29. He's almost too late, but the whole scene is just gnarly with detail, and it's such an engrossing part of the book that I reread it on purpose because it was cool. Burning through the pain, reacting more than thinking, Jensen shot off his feet and dove back at his opponent, deploying his nanoblades as he went. One snapped forward from across his knuckles, the other back from his elbow, and he pivoted in the tight space. Against an unarmored target, or even one with a standard Kevlar rig, Jensen's slashing attack would have been deadly. But to his dismay, the tips of the blades skipped off the smooth ceramic metallic plates that covered the ogre's broad torso. And it's all topped off with one last fight between Thorn and Jensen. It's written like a standoff between two warriors with nothing left to lose, one final sword draw between two samurai, as Jensen realizes the game had to change. His implanted biocells had just enough charge for one final offensive option, and a moment short of their paths crossing in the middle of the train car, Jensen suddenly retracted his nanoblades and went down on one knee, ducking his head and swinging up his arms like he was about to take to the air. Across the upper surface of his torso and his limbs, micro-miniature ejector ports snapped open as one and expelled a storm of tiny spherical explosive charges. Each one no larger than a ball bearing, they spun out from Jensen, putting him at the core of a detonation that briefly turned him into a human cluster munition. When David Seraph created this augmentation weapon, he named it the Typhoon, and it was a deadly storm. Flaming arcs of concussive fire spread like Icarus's burning wings and ripped apart the interior of the train car. Too close to stop her headlong rush into the blast radius, Thorn took the force of the detonation wave, and the discharge tore into her. And we've seen reference to the Typhoon earlier in the book, so regardless if you've played the games or not, it just so awesomely describes this, and it's just mwah.
So good and tasty?
The book as a whole ends with Adam deciding to join Juggernaut and Task Force 29 in order to scope out any rats. At the end of everything, Adam talking with Pritchard mirrors some words that he heard at the end of the first game. "You make it sound like the end of the world," said Pritchard. "Not yet," Jensen told him as he walked away. "But you can see it from here." It brings the story to a full circle, and it's a brilliant way to bring everything back together and just... I love this book. There's plenty of issues with it, one I'll touch on here soon, but everything has issues, and just... God, I think it's exceptional. So, yes, this book is great, but for some reason these tie-in novels really love to hate black people. Oh, okay, not really. But there is a really troubling scene towards the start where the decal showed the simple stick figure icon of a male and a female against a black background with a green border. Jensen had never seen it before, and there were a dozen of them, plastered on to the windows of 5 of the 6 carriages of the People Mover. Know what that means? Enlighten me, said Jensen. It means naturals only, said the first cop, and he shoved Jensen back a step with the heel of his hand, with the other dropping to the grip of a nightstick hanging from his hip. He nodded in the direction of the rear of the train. Get back there. Wow, okay, this is a lot to unpack. So, one of the major criticisms as a whole of both Deus Ex prequel games is attempting to tackle injustice. So of course the natural way to do this is to parallel the plight of black people, duh. And of course people didn't like this. Here's one example from Polygon of all things. At the time of the game's first trailers in 2015, some objective to this illusion. The writer Austin Walker tweeted, "How might we feel if they called it robot Jim Crow laws? And apartheid isn't just a general term. It references a specific period of great trauma and oppression." Other journalists were troubled by the use of the word. Gita Jackson called it wrong-headed, from an article written by Colin Campbell. They pretty much hit the nail on the head throughout the whole article, but the idea is essentially that this is a no-no. And while the term apartheid doesn't show up in the book, having the Augs go to the back of the bus doesn't help anyone's case. And it's the scene from Detroit Become Human. Like, what?
Come to the back of the bus.
Go to the back of the. There aren't even chairs.
Because they're not tired.
I suppose it would only be fair, I guess, in a setting that Deus Ex has this kind of stigma, but to this degree, I guess. But to this degree, I'm really not sure. I wanted to reach out to James Swallow for an interview, but I could not get a response, so I'm not gonna really have any, more insight on this. There's not much else to say other than the racial allegories in this book, and for Mankind Divided, were handled really, really poorly. Other than that, the one other thing that comes from this book is the copious amounts of Jensen and Pritchard fan art. Tumblr loves this ship, and it's one of the more notable things I found while researching this book. To be honest, I kinda like this ship too. I think it's canon, I will die in this hill, and that's why for part 2 of this video, I'm going to go be talking about this in depth. It'll be 2 hours long, and if you hate it, you are a gay-bashing motherfucker.
I asked for this.
So at the end of it all, I like Blacklight. It's a wonderful read from top to bottom, aside from the weird bits and bobs about racism. I suppose it's kinda somewhat forgivable, since the main focus of the book is more towards the intrigue that Adam himself faces, more than the world at large. The scope of it isn't about the racial injustice, it's just an underline that you can't help but notice and think, this really shouldn't be here. Even still, the book is an interesting peek between the games. There's a lot of great moments in the book that really speak to me as a fan of Deus Ex, and a lot of great characterization between new and old characters that I love. Everything's perfectly done for the characters. The action from top to bottom is done really well. I finished reading this in about 5 days, mostly due to myself rereading it for fun. This book is able to capture the tone of Deus Ex almost perfectly, and I have to commend Mr. Swallow for writing this. It's an excellent story and an excellent bridge between the 2 prequel games. All I could ask for is that Square Enix hopefully nixes their Avengers thing and finally wisens up to the fact that Deus Ex should be returned to. I cannot, for the life of me, believe they decided to cancel their cash cow for this?
Uh-oh. I think I found a glitch.
God above. Anyway, Deus Ex gets an A- from me. Easily, it's the best tie-in that I've read so far. There's another Deus Ex book from Mr. Swallow that, funnily enough, takes place before this book, so thinking about it, I probably should have read it first, but too bad. James Swallow is still writing tie-in fiction today. I believe his most recent release at the time of this writing is a Watch Dogs Legion novel. Seems pretty good, and I can't wait to check it out in the future. There are links below, as always, to purchase this book and other reads from Mr. Swallow. If you're a Deus Ex fan, you'll love this read for sure. If you're not, then the book does an okay job catching you up to speed as if you hadn't played the games. It's definitely worth it in my opinion. Even if the small tidbits of improperly handled messages of injustices are present, it's not enough to truly bring this book down. It goes to show that in the end, when it comes to fiction, there are lines to be drawn between the parallels of plights between the future and the present.